So, how does a place that everyone considered totally useless become the richest and most powerful country in history? Well, the story of America's rise, it's probably not what you'd expect. It's this wild tale of luck, conflict, and a whole series of incredible accidents. Let's rewind the clock and see how it all happened.
You know, for over 100 years after Columbus, the big European powers saw North America as pretty much just a giant, inconvenient forest. All the real action and all the gold, that was all happening down south.
And that's the central question, right? How do you go from a forgotten backwater to a global superpower? The answer really begins with what everybody was looking for.
Okay, let's go back to a time when North America was basically just a huge question mark on the map. That was pretty much Columbus's big sales pitch to the Spanish crown. He hadn't found the spices he was looking for, but he found something even better. And that report, it sent Spain into a complete frenzy. But all their focus was on Central and South America, where they found exactly what they wanted, glittering empires that were just ripe for the picking.
So while Spain was busy conquering the Aztecs and Incas, North America was just wide open. The French, they eventually claimed a massive chunk of the middle of the continent for its fur trade, and the English, who showed up almost a century late to the party, started planting their colonies all along the East Coast.
Now this messy, totally unplanned settlement process set the stage for a huge collision of empires. And it was a conflict that would give birth to something nobody expected, a brand new country.
Take a look at these numbers. By the mid-1700s, the British colonies had over 1 million settlers just packed along the coast. The French, maybe 60,000 people, spread out across that massive interior. You just know an imbalance like that couldn't last forever. A fight was definitely coming.
And that fight was the French and Indian War. It ended up being a total knockout victory for the British. They took Canada and all the French land east of the Mississippi. Just like that, Britain's American empire was absolutely enormous. But, winning is expensive.
So, to pay off its massive war debt, Britain turned to its colonies and said, hey, time to pay up. But the colonists, who had fought and died in that war, were furious. They had zero say in the British government, and their rallying cry became legendary: no taxation without representation.
That disagreement over taxes, it exploded into a full-blown revolution. In 1776, the colonies declared independence. After a long, hard-fought war, they actually won. But winning the peace, that was a whole other story. Their first government was a complete mess. So they went back to the drawing board and created the Constitution, a totally radical new system that, against all odds, actually worked.
So the young country was stable, but still pretty small, all things considered. Its explosive growth into a continent-spanning nation? Well, that happened almost completely by accident.
And the first huge break came from a really unlikely source: Napoleon Bonaparte. He had just gotten his hands on the massive Louisiana territory back from Spain, but his eyes were on a much bigger prize: conquering Britain. And to do that, he needed cash, and he needed it fast.
So, he made the Americans an offer they just could not refuse. He said he'd sell them the entire Louisiana territory, all of it, for just $15 million. And just like that, in what has to be one of the greatest real estate deals of all time, the United States literally doubled in size overnight. This wasn't some genius strategy, it was pure, dumb luck, all thanks to a war happening thousands of miles away. That one purchase kicked off an unbelievable 50-year sprint to the Pacific. The U.S. bought Florida, it annexed Texas, and after a pretty ugly war with Mexico, it took the entire Southwest. In just a single generation, the country stretched from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific.
But while the country was getting bigger and bigger on the outside, a deep and bitter conflict was tearing it apart from the inside. So, America now stretched from sea to shining sea. But this nation, founded on the idea of freedom, had a massive crack in its foundation, because so much of it was built on the backs of enslaved people.
And that problem was slavery. For the North, which was industrializing, it was a moral stain on the nation. But for the South, with its agricultural economy, it was the absolute bedrock of their entire way of life. The two sides were just completely incompatible.
After decades of shaky compromises, the election of Abraham Lincoln, who was against the expansion of slavery, was the final straw for the South. They left the Union, and a brutal civil war began.
After 4 brutal years, the Union was preserved, and slavery was finally abolished.
But the human cost was just staggering. And yet, believe it or not, even as the nation was trying to heal, the expansion kept going. In another one of those surprise deals, the U.S. bought the massive territory of Alaska from Russia for a bargain basement price of $7 million.
Okay, so the country is reunified, and it stretches across an entire continent. Now America starts to look outward and begins to project its newfound power across the globe.
Right at the turn of the 20th century, the U.S. really stepped onto the world stage. It annexed Hawaii to get a crucial naval base in the Pacific. It easily beat Spain in a war, taking control of its last colonies. And then it built the Panama Canal, which let its powerful new navy zip between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
So in just a few short centuries, the continent that was once dismissed as a worthless backwater had become a true global power, right on the doorstep of the First World War.
Which really leaves us with the ultimate question. Looking back at this story of sheer luck, bizarre deals, and terrible conflict, was America's rise to power some kind of inevitable destiny? Or was it just the most successful series of accidents in the history of the world?